Welcome to the Talking Phase podcast, where relationships, dating, and personal growth take center stage. From the highs and lows of dating to the triumphs and tribulations of relationships, no topic is off limits. Tune in for laughter, tears, and insights that will leave you feeling seen, heard, and inspired. It's time to get real, get honest, and get talking. Now, here are your hosts, Pam and Tom.
Hello and welcome to the Talking Phase podcast. I'm Tom.
I'm Pam.
All right, Pam, I'm so excited to be here with you for our very first episode of the Talking Phase podcast. How are you feeling today?
I feel so excited. I have been waiting for this for weeks, and I'm just happy that we are finally here.
Oh, I am too. It's going to be great. Well, hey, since this is our very first episode, I think we ought to take just a couple of minutes and share with our already loyal listeners, I'm kind of projecting on our listeners, that we should take just a minute and explain how we got here. Sound like a decent plan?
I would love to do that.
All right. So here's what happened. Some of you guys know that over a few years ago, I used to run a podcast called My Crazy Divorce, and I had a blast doing it. We had some great guests, some amazing stories, and I made some great friends across, during that year or so. Over the last couple of months, I got this, I don't know, call it an itch to relaunch the podcast. And so I wanted to redo My Crazy Divorce, but I got thinking, you know what? I really don't want to just sit and talk about divorce all the time. I wanted to do something a little bit more fun. And, well, I didn't know what it should be about. I just knew I was kind of done with divorce. And so well, you know what? Probably the easiest way to describe how this came about is I should read a message that I sent to Pam earlier this year on TikTok, and I had been following Pam for a couple of years. So Brian, why don't you throw that screenshot up there, and I'll read this to the audience. And this was my very first message. This is just 5 or 6 weeks ago. And I said, "Hey, Pam, I love your content and your attitude. I was talking to my sister-in-law last night about reviving my podcast, My Crazy Divorce, and I told her that the only way it would work is if I could find a female co-host to round it out. We brainstormed for a few and then gave up. But then one of your videos came across my FYP this morning and my mind was blown. You'd be perfect. Let me know if we can talk about it. I love doing it, and I think it would be a blast to get it going again." So that was just 5 or 6 weeks ago. And well, Pam, what happened next? You take it from there.
Well, I have gotten many, many direct messages on TikTok, and I have read some of them, but for some magical reason, the first few words in your message really caught my attention. And so I opened it and I read that message, and a light bulb went off in my head because I have been talking to friends and family about wanting to start a podcast. And I knew that I wanted it to be about dating, aging, relationships, marriage, all those things that it seems like people are trying so hard to figure out and just are unable to figure it out. And I'm one of those people. And so being one of those people, I was so excited to get your message. And of course, I loved all of the chatting that we did back and forth for days. We tossed around ideas, and I was definitely on the side of not doing a divorce podcast because it took me 5 years to get over my divorce. I had no desire to relive it or to feel any of that drama again. And since you were so willing to kind of open up about whatever kind of content we could make, we definitely had a meeting of the minds. So we covered all of those topics. I think we agreed on every single one of them. And all we needed then was a name for our show. And that was sure easy, huh?
I don't know if it was easy. I think people would be surprised how many hours we spent brainstorming. And I've got a whiteboard in my office in the other room that I had written, 50 different possibilities down. But once we settled on the Talking Phase, it was instant. I mean, once we figured it out, it just kind of hit.
And I was kidding about it being easy. It was anything but easy. I was talking about it at dinner with friends, like banging my head against the wall, trying to find something perfect.
So I do have one question for you. And I think I could probably answer, but you'd do it better. What is the talking phase? Not everyone will know.
Well, I think it's many things now, but I think when we first came out with the name, that what it was to me was the most difficult part of dating. It was the life that I entered after my divorce, which were dating apps, which to me is the equal to people shopping. You're just looking at people's pictures and swiping right on anybody you think is good looking and swiping left on people you don't think are your type. And eventually, once you connect with somebody and there's a mutual physical attraction, you start the talking phase. And the talking phase is a disaster. Like, it's a disaster. It can go on days, weeks. It'll go on literally as long as you'll entertain it. That's the essence of the talking phase.
Yeah. And I will say, one of the things you and I were talking about the other day is that one of the reasons the talking phase sucks so bad is that it's after the talking phase when and I'm putting air quotes around this, when the relationship generally falls apart. So people are scared to get out of the talking phase and get into the actually meeting in person phase.
And I 100% agree with that. I think that while you're in the talking phase, people still have hope. Like, this could be fantastic. He or she could be the one. But then after that first date, we know that like 90% of those hopes fade.
Yeah. And damn it, I wish I could go back to that talking phase when I still had hope.
Oh, that's sad. And I agree with that. But we're laughing about it now. And
absolutely.
that's kind of the best thing about the podcast is that hopefully we'll give people a reason to laugh about it instead of cry about it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's great. I think that gives everybody kind of at least an outline of how we got here. And just so everybody's aware, the show, we tried to figure out, it's not like Seinfeld where it's a show about nothing. But at the same time, we didn't want to pigeonhole ourselves into a specific topic. So we will be talking about divorce. We will talk about dating. We'll talk about relationships. We're going to talk about aging. I mean, we're both in our 50s. Sorry, Pam, if I'm giving away a secret. But we are going to be talking about all the stuff that we have to deal with as single people in our 50s, period.
Right.
And go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that hopefully we'll be challenging people to not give up. And even though it is difficult, you and I never gave up on the dating aspect of our lives. We never gave up on the talking phase of our lives. So I'm hoping that all of the topics we bring to people will give them a little bit of hope, maybe some advice, and maybe just hear what other people are going through like them.
Yeah. And by the way, if you haven't noticed it yet, if you haven't followed us on TikTok, make sure you do. We're at Talking Phase Podcast. And you'll see a stark difference between Pam and me. Pam is the sweetest, nicest person and is constantly saying, how can I build everyone up? And I'm always looking for a reason to be snarky and snotty. So when she says, I hope that all of our topics make everyone feel better, or whatever she just said, I hope you feel better, but it's going to come across kind of as a snotty thing from me. So just fair warning. And
that's so honest. He's so raw and honest. Like, if you piss him off, he's going to let you know you've pissed him off. And I'm just going to be like, why would you say that?
Yeah, but it'll happen. And so lastly, when we talk about my crazy divorce, I've already reached out to 2 or 3 of my former guests who have, it's been years since I interviewed them last, and they've agreed to come on the show and kind of give us an update. And it won't be talking about divorce. Like one of them, the first guy that will be on our show in the next week or two, from the minute we met, we were like brothers from another mother, and we just got along just perfectly and famously. And he's getting married in August. And so, his divorce has turned into the best thing that ever happened to him. So that's the kind of stuff that we'll be doing. I'm not necessarily advertising for My Crazy Divorce, but you know what, if you want to go back and listen to My Crazy Divorce, specifically the episode called Muscle Memory, that will probably get you up to speed on the guy that we're going to be interviewing here in the next week or two. Anyway, I hope that answers a lot of the questions we've gotten from our viewers on TikTok about how we got together. And now that we've done that, do we need to cover anything else, or are we ready to start the show?
No, I think we're ready.
Okay. I think what we've decided to do today for this first episode, which again, I can't believe we're finally here on our first episode, we want to talk about a video that you posted on TikTok. I think it was just last week, right?
Yeah, it was last week.
Something about lowering standards. What's Well, let's talk about that.
Okay. Well, the idea for the TikTok came from a personal experience that happened to me. And I think that most of the videos that I make, and probably most of the things I talk about, are personal to me in some manner. In this instance, I have a group of friends. We've been friends for about, I don't know, about 8 or 9 months. So we're still in the getting to know you phase of the friendship, but we spend quite a bit of time together and we commiserate a lot. So we share a lot about our backgrounds, our dating lives, and things like that. About 3 weeks ago, I was on a beach trip with these ladies, and we had been out for the day. We were just sitting around on the couches in the family room at the Airbnb that we had rented. We were talking about relationships, people that we have dated recently, getting some input from each other, but we are always a very positive group. One of my friends, Laura, turned to me and said, Pam, if you don't lower your standards, you're going to be single forever. And I just kind of stopped because I'm a very, very non-confrontational person. But the whole room stopped. Like everybody just got really, really quiet. I think because we're always so positive, this came across as negative. And I'm not sure whether that's how she intended it in the moment. But of course, I was taken aback. And it made me really think, because at the time, I didn't want to call her out on that. But after a few days or weeks of just thinking about that comment and how it made me feel, I made that video, which basically said, as a female woman, I've been married twice. I'm in my 50s. I have 2 children. They're both grown adults. And I don't want to lower my standards. I don't want to make the same mistakes that I've made in the past. I'm older. I am also wiser. I don't think it's a good idea to try to convince yourself that somebody that just doesn't do it for you, whether that's chemistry, physical attraction, education, job, whether he has a car, whether he lives with his mom. I mean, these are things that a lot of people are super open to. And I think that's great. I think that, like, if you're open to everyone, you're doing a lot more dating than I am, because I'm literally looking for a unicorn. I'm looking for somebody that I have a lot in common with, that I feel is a good intellectual match, but also that I feel physical chemistry with. And with those basic things, I think you can find out over time whether that person is a good match. I think that if you lower your standards, however, you wind up having to ignore all of the things about that person that bothered you from the very beginning. So you're fighting a losing battle.
Well, I will tell you the reason. First off, I violently agree with you on everything that you just said. But one of the reasons we chose to make this episode, our very first episode, about that video is because some of the comments, it's really an interesting thing to see. There are many people in the comments who disagree with you, or disagree with us, because, like I just said, I agree with you.
Right.
That also talk about how that was an inappropriate thing to say. For example, you know what? I know that somebody, Marcy, Brian, why don't you put the Marcy shot up there? Great. This is one of the comments on that video talking about your friend Laura. That is not a friend. That's someone who is actually jealous of you and wants you to have something less than you desire so she can always one up you. Nope. High tide raises the ship. I think she means high tide raises all boats or something like that.
No, I got what, I didn't see that comment personally, but I certainly can relate to what she's saying. Even if I don't think this was a jealousy issue, I still feel like, not comfortable with lowering my standards just to get a date or a boyfriend. I don't need a boyfriend that much.
Well, I see comments all the time on TikTok and other places where women are always, I don't want, they're kind of getting on other women for not supporting other women. And so, but I look at that and I'm going, okay, so was your friend supporting you, or is Marcy not supporting you? I mean, women, I can't lump all women together, but generally women say they support each other. What do you think about that?
I think it depends on the women. I think that the women within my social group do 99% of their time support each other. I think that we all support each other. I think that's why this comment came across as so surprising to me and other girls within the group. Because I mean, we're the kind of women that like, we love what you're wearing. I love what you're wearing. I love your hair. I mean, and that's, I think, what draws us to each other so much of the time. But I do think there's a whole nother group of women who are not very kind. And I think they generally are sitting behind their keyboards. We call them keyboard warriors.
Right.
And I think that attractive women sometimes like to attack other women. I don't know what makes this such a huge occurrence, but it seems like that camp is divided in half women building other women up and half women dragging other women down.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but as you and I talked about that the other day. I think it's an interesting challenge that women have to deal with.
Yeah, no, it is a challenge, and I think you have to pick your friends very carefully. And I am going to say that she is still a good friend of mine, and we did talk about it, and she apologized. It came out rougher than it was intended,
Sure.
But she wasn't wrong. I'm not here to say she was wrong, because if I wasn't as picky, I'd have a lot more dates and a lot more boyfriends.
Well, let's talk about that then for a second, because so she put down and it's not just her, because again, I've read all these comments on this TikTok, and she's not alone in saying this. She just happened to be the purpose. I mean, the one who caused the video in the first place. But so what? I mean, she basically laid down the gauntlet. It's like, you either lower your standards or you stay single.
Right.
I stitched that video on TikTok and I said, so what? Who cares? I mean, and that's how I feel about it. I mean, are you prepared to be single for the rest of your life, or is that a scary thought for you?
That's a tough question. Honestly, no, I don't think that I am prepared to be single for the rest of my life. I don't think that I ever intended to be single for 5 years. But at the same time, if the only way to have a great relationship with somebody is to lower my standards to the point where I have to convince myself that I like the person that I've decided to go on a date with or to keep dating, then I would much prefer staying single and being independent. I have the means to be single and independent. So it's a want, it's not a need. And that is also a big deal.
Yeah, I've always felt that lowering your standards, or I'm just going to start calling it settling, because it's pretty much the same thing, right?
Right.
At least I think it is. If you settle, by definition, you're okay with less than you wanted. You're accepting of mid or subpar, right?
Right. I mean, I hate to say subpar. I mean, I don't think that anybody is subpar. I just think that we all have an idea of what we're looking for. We all have an idea, of what it's
what par is.
Yeah. I mean,
and so if someone doesn't meet it, that's called subpar, Pam.
Yeah. Yes, it's called subpar, but that's here's Tom being himself and me being. I don't like to consider any human subpar. I just consider them not my type or not what I'm looking for, not a good match.
Okay. And that's all fair. And again, like we warned everybody that you're just the sweetest person, and I'm just a snarky jerk sometimes. But let's think about this though. What are the standards that could be lowered? For example, I'll give you two examples. I've read through all these comments, and by the way, those of you who haven't watched this video, Pam described it well. You can certainly go watch it, but go read the comments. That's where the fascinating thing comes in, because if you were to divvy them up, most of the women that comment say they won't lower their standards to financially support a guy.
I saw that.
And most of the men say they won't lower their standards to date someone they find unattractive. And I'm saying most. Remember, I really try not to lump all men and all women into different categories. But again, it does fall along these gender lines quite often. And so aside from appearance and financial, what else could be lowered?
Well, I suppose there are women out there that don't care if a man has a sense of humor or can have an intelligent conversation about current events. Maybe they don't care about the age of a man, whether he's much older or much younger than her. I tend to stay within 5 years of my age, whether it's younger or older. I don't really want to have to explain something that happened in my childhood and have somebody look at me like, you did what? Like, you guys didn't wear a seatbelt? Like, your parents smoked in the car? I mean, like, I was born in the 60s. So yeah, I think that there's a multitude of things that make somebody your quote unquote type or what you're looking for versus, what you might settle for. Hey, he's great. He's smart, but he's down on his luck. So he lives in his mom's extra room and doesn't have a car. So I have to pick him up. That might be fine for a woman. And I'm not judging that woman for being fine with it. It's just not where I am at this point in my life.
Right. Yeah, no, and we can add to that. So for example, when I first got divorced, or I should say separated, when I first was separated 4 or 5 years ago and I started dating for the first time in a million years, I had not set standards. I didn't realize that you didn't have to, or that you should.
Really? You didn't realize that? How old were you?
Well, I was 50. What was I? 50, 51 or 50? I was 52. No, but it wasn't. It was standards on a dating site. I didn't realize I had to put all these filters in. I just kind of
Oh, I
assumed.
got you.
Yeah, no, I had standards. I just didn't. I didn't document them in the dating profile. And so I ended up going out with people who were way too young, and I didn't like it, which I find ironic because on TikTok, I'm accused at least 50 times a day of only dating young women. And I'm with you. I don't date anybody under 50.
Right.
I just won't, because I've been out 4 years ago with a 25-year-old girl, and I'm just going, this is the most awkward, embarrassing, uninteresting evening I've ever experienced. So yeah, I don't do that. Well, then, by the way, and I'm 56 years old now, so other things that I find really interesting. I dated a woman a few months ago. We went out twice. So did I date her? I don't know. We went out twice, and she was retired and was traveling all the time, and said, I'm looking for somebody who can travel all the time. I'm like, well, I still work. And I work for a great company that has unlimited PTO, but I think there's a limit on the unlimited PTO.
Right.
Not to mention cash. I mean, I can't afford to be gone all the time. So anyway, so I guess she would have had to lower her standards to date me, which she wasn't willing to do, which is
Well,
fine.
she'd have had to stay in town at least.
Right. Well, but her standards were, he has to be able to travel all the time. And so she would have had to lower that standard or compromise. Which is an interesting thing, because that brings up another concept that we should talk about, because a lot of comments were about compromise versus lowered standards.
Yeah, I
So
saw
in fact, Brian, do you have the there you go. Thank you.
Wow, he's like,
Yeah, Brian is on it. Our great producer, Brian, is he's on it. He's ahead of it. So the comment here is, the question should be, are you willing to compromise with another person or lower your standards? Compromise is an art, and lowering your standards isn't. And I'll tell you, I love that. I love that comment.
I can see the logic in that. I think that absolutely, if somebody fits into your life and the things that you've decided are important to you, but like your situation, they can't travel. I mean, I know me personally, that would be an easy compromise as long as they could travel a little bit. I would trade traveling all of the time for somebody who is a great human being that's going to really make my life much more joyful than it already is. So some people are willing to compromise on things like that, where others have very strict guidelines. I think you have some pretty strict guidelines.
I do. I do. In fact, what's interesting is, I think that when we talk about compromise versus lowering your standards, I think there's a fine line. I think sometimes you compromise so much that you cross over to the point where you've lowered your standards. And I think that it's absolutely, I don't know what the right word is, but it's tough to know when you've crossed that line.
No.
unless you've written a set of standards that you're unwilling to
Right. But a lot of us
compromise.
just kind of follow our heart. And, if you're crazy about somebody and, they're making you really happy, a lot of us, if we had like a black and white list of things that we absolutely would not entertain, might knock a couple things off of those lists in exchange for a really great relationship.
And see, this is one of those things that Pam and I have had this conversation. I literally cannot disagree more with that, which is fine. We're still friends. I hope, but yeah, maybe. Yeah, this is our first show. Might be our last, everyone, just because she's gonna. But I'll tell you why. I have a list, and I would, I'll share it with anybody that ever wants to see it. I don't know if anyone really cares, but
maybe
the
on our
fact
next
is,
episode you can share it.
yeah, okay. If people care, I'll share it. But I do have a list, and it is a list of complete non-negotiables. These are must-haves. They are ones and zeros, black and white. There's no gray area on these things. I have a lot of areas where I don't have a list, of course, and it's stuff like I won't go out with anyone with young children. And I don't think that's unreasonable to have a black and white rule, and I will not compromise on that, no matter how hot I find someone or how much fun we had on our first date or any, you know what I mean? It's just, that's just an example of, I think there's probably 30 things on my list.
And it goes back to the talking phase, because honestly, knowing that you won't date anybody with young children, that's something that absolutely should have just knocked them out where there would never have been a first date. But a lot of people aren't completely honest during the talking phase.
Yep.
And you wind up wasting a lot of time on a first date, knowing after 10 minutes or so that that's not somebody who you want to pursue a relationship with.
Yeah. So I do have a comment I want to share here. Brian, can you throw Mike's up there? So Mike Fernino, who, by the way, looks like my older brother, at least in that picture, says, all I know is that I will understand what my standards actually are when I find the right person, because they will set the standard. Wow. I will tell you right now, my butt clenched when I read that, because
that's very difficult.
Yeah. Good for you, Mike, if that's the way life is going to work for you. But let me tell you, without a list before you start that relationship, you are putting blinders on, because as you meet that woman or that man, if you're a woman, or gay, that's fine too, whoever you meet, if you start to like them, you start to sweep those red flags under the rug.
You sure do. And then you marry them.
Yes. Twice.
Twice for me too.
Yeah. So yeah, I just think that if you let somebody else set the standards for you, what you're doing is you say, I'm planning to ignore red flags, in my opinion. That's just,
I make a lot of videos about red flags, because I think that we have all, gone through these phases where I call it a dry spell, where you just haven't matched with anybody in a while, or the conversations are kind of stale. The talking phase is really disappointing. And somebody says, hey, you want to grab a drink? And you're like, oh God, I know that this is not my person. I know that this conversation has been so boring that I can't imagine this first date. And you go, sure, where do you want to meet? And you go on that first date, and you're almost always right. I mean, 99% of the time, you should have just said, I don't think we're a match before you go on the date. But we all, at some point in our life, maybe except for you, Tom, have ignored a red flag and just run full circle into the fiery building.
Well, if you watch any of my videos on TikTok, you know that unfortunately I ignore red flags as bad as the next guy.
Even with the list though, like how do you still manage to go out with people that are like red flags when you have 20 things that you've excluded?
Well, that's a great question. So I have some videos that I made just a couple of weeks ago about I don't know, you call it a situationship. I called it a relationship. It was 7 weeks. So whatever it was, a dating scenario with this woman for 7 weeks. She did not like to be complimented.
Which is bizarre.
It is. And I think it's a red flag. But ironically, I did not put that on my list, must like compliments. Because
better be on there now.
It is. It actually is. It's not written just like that, but I do have that on my list now. Because that list never shrinks, but it does grow. Um,
Yeah.
and there are several other things that she did. Like, um, she didn't like that I texted her, that I responded to her texts too quickly, because I have texting on my computer. So, I mean, to me, it's just like instant messenger. It's not, I don't have to pick up my phone most of the time. So I see her, and I just type her a message back. She didn't like that. She thought it made me look desperate. I didn't have on my list of must haves, must enjoy rapid responses on texting. I mean, that, again, that's a silly thing to have to put on a list. So
Well, she was a
no,
really silly human being.
yeah, she was, but that's the thing. I ignored a couple of red flags because they weren't on my list. And quite frankly, I think I relied on my list too much, which is a completely different conversation that we should
Yeah,
have at some point.
maybe. I don't know. There might have been a couple people who might have been great partners that got blown out for some of those things. But at the same time, I've seen your list. I understand how serious you take it.
Mm-hmm.
Tom even has some bonus categories on his list where if you've met this criteria of like, I think there must be 20 things on there.
At least.
You get extra credit if you have these extra bonus things on there.
Yeah, and there's simple things like,
Don't be
like
intimidated, ladies. He's just waiting for a good woman.
I'm looking for a unicorn too.
I
I don't
know.
think that's too much. And gosh darn it, I'm worth it.
Most people would be disagreeing with us that looking for a unicorn isn't too much. But I just think it's where we are in life, that here we are, we're settled, we're happy, we like ourselves, we like our lives. And so if someone's going to come into it, they sure as hell are going to need to make it better than it already is.
You know, you just said something I thought was perfect right there. The thing is that at this age, I'm unwilling. I am not going to settle. But we are not, how do I say this? Other people feel differently. And if you look at some of those comments, in fact, I've got one up here right now. Brian, will you throw up the one from J Ada 719? She says, or he, I don't even know, man or woman. I don't know who that is, but whoever, I think so too, for some reason.
The ocean.
Oh, look at that. Anyway, we'll say it's a she. She says, I don't want to settle either, but the thought of dying alone terrifies me.
We're all gonna die alone.
Oh, see, and I disagree with that. I even made a whole video about that. We're going to have that conversation.
Well, I mean, my kids will probably be there, but I think when that moment comes, no one's going with you on that trip.
All right. Yeah, I actually did a video about that where I said, look, when I was a little kid, I was afraid of getting injections, shots. So yeah, I was the one getting the shots, but I always felt better if my mom was there holding my hand. And so that's how I feel about dying at this point.
I understand. And I agree with you on that level for sure.
Yeah. But so that's an interesting concept though, from J Ada, doesn't want to settle, but is terrified of dying alone. So I wonder which one's going to win out.
Well, that screams, I'm going to lower my standards because I'd rather die with somebody sitting next to me, even if they're screaming at me and upset because they'd rather be watching football and they have to be there with me when I'm dying. I mean, like, if you settle, then you're not going to get that person that gives you those things that you so desperately want. If you're willing to trade somebody that is very emotional and compassionate for somebody that is kind of uninterested and maybe tough or a hard ass, those types of things cancel each other out. And then are you really any better off with what you've accepted versus what you wanted?
Yeah. No, I think I think it's kind of tragic, to be honest, when people are willing to lower their standards. And again, I'm not saying everyone's standards have to be looking for the unicorn.
No, of course not.
But look for who you want and don't settle for less, I think is the message I would give.
I agree with you. A lot of comments I saw said, I'm not looking for perfection, but I'm looking for somebody that's perfect for me. And that's exactly how I feel. Like, I don't think anybody's perfect. I'm far from perfect. But I think when you meet somebody who's perfect for you, that's the person that you're willing to put the time in, the talking phase, dating, to try to find that magical relationship that's going to last the rest of your life. It has to be somebody that's perfect for you.
Yep. I love the fact that your dog is part of the show right now.
Yeah, yeah, he wants to go out. He's gonna have to wait. You were laughing, and I'm like, "What are you laughing at?" And I see.
I think it's great. He's
I
just
hope
like,
people watch this on YouTube so that they can see Charlie sitting behind me by the door. In a minute,
he's like, hey, mom, my turn. All right. Well, I'll tell you what, I think we're getting close to the end of this anyway, but I'll tell you what, I think that there's one other comment from one of our biggest, I'm going to say he's one of our biggest fans. He's at least one of our biggest contributors, from A Carpenter. And
oh,
I
he's a
think
good
he
friend
came
of
from
mine.
your other page,
He
right?
sure did.
So why don't you read that one? I love this one.
It says, I will never lower my standards or expectations for a relationship. If it doesn't work out, he said it doesn't work out when you do that. Like the song says, it's sad to belong to someone else when the right one comes along. And that's my favorite comment of the day. Like,
Absolutely.
ding, 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 like 100%.
Yeah. A Carpenter, he wins the internet today. I love that.
No,
And
that inevitably is probably always playing in the back of my mind that, I have had, whether we call them relationships or situationships. For me, a relationship is when you're really all in it. Like you've been dating for 3 to 6 months and you are 100% invested. And a situationship is anything before that point. So I understand. I see he's rolling his eyes.
no, I'm shrugging my shoulders. I just don't have a better answer than that.
But I feel like every time you start to settle for less than what you're looking for and you lower your standards and you spend 3, 6, 9 months, a year with that person, maybe it is better than being alone. Maybe you're not lonely. You have somebody to watch TV with or have dinner with or whatever. But how many people that really, really would have brought you complete joy, challenged you, lit you up from the inside, have just met their person and it's not you because you were busy settling?
Yeah. I love that comment. I love the whole thing. It's probably a country song, so I probably wouldn't like it, but but I love the message. How's that?
Me too.
All right.
Me too, very much.
So I guess even though we've had a couple of disagreements about things, details along the way, I think we can safely say that we totally agree that I would rather be alone than with someone who makes me feel lonely. I would rather be alone than feel like I settled. For someone that I'm not attracted to physically or emotionally, or that I feel like I have to carry, all of those different things that we've been talking about. Any disagreement on that?
No, I think that if you don't think you're with somebody that you're going to fall in love with, and for me to fall in love with somebody, it has to be my person. And if you're not going to fall in love with that person, what are you doing? You're just spinning your wheels.
Right. Exactly. Okay. Any parting thoughts before we close this up?
Well, I think to summarize, just don't give up on the possibility that there is somebody out there that is perfect for you. And it doesn't mean it's easy to find them, for God's sake. I have been single for 5 years. I have dated plenty of people and I've had some situationships and a couple relationships. And when I realized that it wasn't working out, I got out because I don't want to miss my person. And maybe they won't come along. A lot of people tell me, you're going to wait forever. You're going to wind up with cats. I don't even like cats. I have a dog. But at the end of the day, I think that I would rather be waiting for somebody perfect for me than trying to convince myself that the person that I'm with is worth another try, another week, another year. And the years just keep going.
Yeah.
And you're just sad and unhappy and just realize that you should have waited.
Yeah. I'm with you 100%. I couldn't say it any better, so I'm not even going to try. So with that, I think we've got a wrap on our first episode. How do you feel?
I feel great. I could not have enjoyed this any more than I did.
Well, good. And we're going to get better and better at this. But here's the thing, guys. We, just like we just said, we had a great time. And so I hope you liked the show. And if you did, we need you to do us a favor. I need you to take 5 seconds right now and just give us a 5-star rating or a thumbs up or whatever it is on the platform that you're listening to right now. And then if you can, just take an extra 30 seconds and actually write a review.
But only if it's nice.
Yeah.
Otherwise, don't do anything.
Yes. But giving that those ratings and reviews, for some reason, that's actually what helps get the word out more than anything. But at the same time, please be sure to share this show with your friends and your family so that they don't miss out. So what do you think? We good?
I think that this was great. I enjoyed it. I look forward to doing it again.
Okay, guys, if you have any other comments or if you have a story you want to share, or if you want to be a guest on the show, send us an email, talkingphase@gmail.com. And again, like we've said, we do a lot on TikTok. So if you're not following us on TikTok, go find us. We're at Talking Phase Podcast. There's some really great stuff out there. So with that, until next week, this is the Talking Phase Podcast signing off.
Have a great night, everybody, or a great day, or a great week.